Okay, this is going to be a guide on tanking Iron Conqueror from Scion's Keep. Of all the bosses in VT, Iron Conqueror easily has the longest rotation, and I suppose the first task in learning how to tank this boss is going to be memorizing the patterns and sort of figuring out your flow of combat. If you look at the top right on my minimap, you'll see that I'm standing at 12 o'clock. It's where I usually start. Most of my team is sitting, well, all of my team is sitting in around the 6 o'clock position. You can reverse this if you feel like it, but this is just sort of what we do. So to begin with, standard BM rotation and opener, and the first attack that he's going to do is this simple double slash at you. It is a yellow attack, fairly negligible amount of damage, and there's really nothing to it, so I usually just face tank it. I suppose if you're low on HP, you can F block this, or one block this, though I guess you should avoid trying to one block as much as possible. And this is the second attack in his standard rotation. He'll lift his sword behind him with his two hands up in the air. I believe one of the old guides called this downfall. It's a red attack that will induce a knockdown. So I usually just use my 3. You can see already on my skill that I've already started using it. It's already on cooldown. And then the third attack in his rotation is going to be a yellow knock-up attack. You'll see that I just F-block this right there. It's a yellow attack, but it does inflict an aerial, so you will want to actually F-block this. Then his third attack I usually just call a special. At least we call it a special in this raid. It can be one of two attacks. It could either be meteors or a cross. The way you determine it is by looking at his sword. So you can see here that he twirled his sword and looks like he's about to slam it down into the ground. That is indicator that it is going to be a cross. Had he just lifted his sword in the air and held it there, that would be the indicator for meteor. Next attack in the rotation is, so the next attack in his rotation would normally still be a double slash into a stab, into a double backslash, into a 5-hit combo. However, in this case, we've hit 95%, and so we are proccing a mech phase, or we're starting a mech phase. So he's going to first throw his 2 orbs at the people that are luring them. But he will continue his rotation. So there you saw the double swipe and the backslash. So after the backslash, the double swipe into the stab. Double swipe is the same as his initial attack. No difference there. The stab is a yellow attack. It is blockable. I usually face tank it. It does do quite a bit more damage though than the double swipes. That's your indicator to E around the boss, is the stab, so that you can sort of direct the backslashes away from your team normally. Although here he is going to start his swords dance. So when you start seeing this red shield pop up around him, that is your indicator to SS. You generally want to SS this first wave. You'll usually have your stealth handle the subsequent 3 pulses, but if you look at the top at the boss's HP, you'll see that he has his debuffs, a couple stacks of bleed, chill, and I believe the punishment effect from the earring. But underneath that, you'll see his defense buff. That is the indicator for his shields. He's currently immune to all damage. When that buff expires is when the shockwave, the next 3 pulses of the shockwave hit. So you can see that. There they go. And again, we're already starting the conducting phase. So in this case, you're going to see these orbs around him. You'll see a total of, I believe it's 6 total, and you'll usually see 3 of them light up in a triangle shaped pattern. So you can see I have one at the top at 12 o'clock, one over here at the bottom right at like 4 o'clock, and one opposite to that 8 o'clock. If those 3 did not light up, it would be an upside down triangle, and it'd be the other 3 that light up. Usually you have a predefined pattern where you want to do your conducting phase. For us, it's usually 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, so it'd be the one directly behind SK right now or to the top right. So I'm just going to go back, get into position, stand 3 meters from the boss, and just chain lightning. This does not reset his rotation, but you'll see very quickly. So you can see right there, that is the second to last attack of his rotation that you would normally turn away from your party. It's a bit iffy once you have higher DPS. You just sort of need to react and see where your party's at. You'll see here, though, that I have begun moving away from my initial 12 o'clock position. If you're looking at my map, or even just looking at the orb at the bottom right of my screen, that is where the initial 12 o'clock position is. If you look at my map at the top right, you'll see that my party is centered around the top left of the map and the bottom right of the map, or sorry, yeah, bottom right of the map. So I know that those are where the ads have spawned and that the laser is going to connect from there. So I'm just going to sort of position myself at a 90-degree angle to that. This is the 5th attack. It's the first 2 hits will induce a knockback, and then, well, they all induce a knockdown. But it comes in like 2 hits and then 3 hits. You can just hold 1 for this if you want to. Otherwise, you can F block the first 2 hits, break the F block, and then F block again. But holding 1 on this one's the easiest. And then the rotation resets. All right, so we're going to, well, I should have actually iframed that. So here the laser has formed, and it's imperative that they keep the laser on the boss because that does do damage to the boss. And your job is just sort of to spin tank along with the laser so that you aren't getting hit by it, because it does do a fair amount of damage to you. So, like I said, I messed that up, but I blocked the aerial. Here we can see that once again he's twirling his sword for a cross. So we're going to Hung Moon block that. You can see that I'm starting to just sort of move along with the laser. Double swipe into a stab, and I'm just going to E around behind the boss. This time you'll see me do it correctly, although there's a teammate behind him now for whatever reason. He turns it into a spear / polearm thing, and he swipes behind him twice. Then I'm going to move back to my, well, I'm going to block. You can move back to your initial position at this point if you want to. Here we see swords dances happening. Again, ideally you would want to block. Ideally you would want to block, SS, the initial pulse of swords dance. Keep in mind here that sometimes swords dance will happen just as the orbs are exploding. So if your bull drivers are saying that they're going to sheath, it's sometimes just better to just sit in the sheath, and well, it's usually better to just sit in the sheath and let the 2 ball explosions and swords dance play out before breaking out. But yeah, after that, his rotation, he'll continue his rotation. So you can see he's on another pattern. Once again, twirling his sword, so that's a cross. We actually got quite a bit of crosses back to back, or all crosses up until this point. He will do his mech phase at starting 95% and then every 15% after. So you can see that we're just, once your DPS is high enough, you'll usually just be pushing him into continuous mech phases. So the stab, I get behind him. He's going to throw his puddles first because, again, mech phase. And polearm, get back into position. 5 hit, and once again you can see that you can see 1 ad at the top left of my screen. It's sort of being blocked by the party 1, but by doing that I know where the opposite ad is and where to position for when the lasers come. But right now I'm paying attention to the orbs. I can see that 1 is spawning at 12 o'clock, so my conductors are getting into position, and we're just gonna continue. You can see that I've begun moving to prepare for the laser. Swords dance is coming, so I'm SSing the first hit and letting my stealth go for the subsequent hits. Again, I usually 3 the downfall and then just F block the knockup. And that's media right there. You saw that he just sort of lifted his swords up into the air and did not do his twirl. This I usually do not iframe, or I don't normally hung block this, unless my ball drivers are going to drive it close to the boss, in which case they're in danger of getting hit. That's something that will be, you guys have to call out and coordinate. So you'll see that the main focus on this boss is that I try to sort of stand like a turret. Generally try not to move too much. This way your party knows where you are and where the boss attacks are being directed. Usually only moving because of a laser or because of a conducting phase, or to, face an attack away from the rest of the party. But for the most part, I try to stand still like a turret. Just sort of makes things more predictable for your team. So he's completed a set of rotations. So there's the downfall. Again, you see me 3. I'm going to F block the knock up. And we're going to see a special, the twirl, that indicates the cross. In this case, we see that the cross is happening at roughly the same times that the explosions were happening. So I just sort of sit in sheath for both of them. Don't bother wasting Hanmung block because, you might need it later. And we're at 43%. You can walk through the boss if you want to. That's another way of doing it without having to QE in order to get certain attacks to face the other way. You will have to do it a lot earlier, though. It's slower, but I did it in this case because why bother breaking draw stance? Here, that's what happens when it's too slow. You actually end up screwing yourself. Here's an SS to dodge the first wave of sword stance. Again, I'm not going to do much because stealth will handle the other 3. And I'm at we see that the boss here is at 39%. Phase is shifting at the second phase starts at 35%. So we've got about 4% more. Here's the 5 hit. If you get hit by the first 2 procs of the 5 hit, you can generally perform a get up attack if you're quick enough. Otherwise, do a counter and block afterwards. But usually the damage isn't enough to kill you. If you're at full HP, the damage usually isn't enough to kill you. So it's not too bad. Here he started a mech phase. Usually, as you can see, the boss's HP is at 37%. Usually if the mech phase is close enough, or is starting at a point where the boss's HP is close to 35%, you'll usually just call for a push, because the ads will disappear at 35%. So that's likely what's happening here. You probably see just a few people going to grab aggro on the boss. Well, actually, apparently they are doing the mech. But here, you see that we're at 36%, and you see me walk towards the 9 o'clock position. This is in preparation for the next stage. So here I am at 9 o'clock. However, looks like we're actually going to not push. Well, okay, it looks like we were getting into position to conduct just in case we could not push, but we ended up pushing. So not that big of a deal. He takes a little while to shift phases. So once again, I'm going back to 9 o'clock, and what we notice here is that the boss rotation resets when that happens. So he did his double swipe. He's done his downfall. In this case, I SS'd because my 3 is still on cooldown, and I'm just going to walk, or 2 right back into him so that he doesn't do his healing reduction at me. An important thing to note about this boss, you do not want to be at range. You pretty much always want to be at 3 meters or closer to the boss so that he doesn't start doing his anti-range mechanic. And again, he did his knock-up attack, and the lasers are forming. Now here is the one-time difference that occurs in at the 35% phase. He only does this once, but you can see here that he points his sword at the closest person to him, and you'll notice that I am going to get a challenge buff. So very quickly, if you just noticed by my QE at the very top, I just received my challenge buff. And if you look, he's changing his sword. He's doing this one-time only attack. He's changing his sword to a polearm, and he's going to try to knock you back. So here my 3 has come up, so I'm using my multi-slash. Normally, I don't use my C iframe at all throughout the rest of the fight. If you can look back at the rest of the video, I never used my, what's it called, my shoulder. So normally I would just one block and then press C to dodge this attack, but you know, if multi-slash is up, it's up. So I'm going to use that, and you can see that he is going to try to perform his knockback on me. That is a one-time only attack. It literally happens after he does the challenge, happens once at 35%, never happens again. If you do get knocked back, of course, he's going to do his healing reduction on you, depending on when this is. Well, since it's post-nerf already, on live anyway, it'll be a 50% healing reduction, but before it used to be a 100% healing reduction. So as long as you avoid this knockback, you're good. You can see that while I have this challenge buff that's at the top of my buff bar, these red lasers will do a ton of damage to your party members, but insofar as you have that challenge buff, you can actually ignore the lasers. You will still, I do still move, but don't worry too much about getting too close to the lasers, because this time you will not take damage. After that, the boss's rotation continues. You can see that he's thrown his sword into the air. He's doing his meteor attack. And then he's going to double swipe. And, okay, in this case, he's jumped into sword stance. But he's going to do his stab. Now, if you look at my map, because normally after the stab comes the backslash. Now, you can see that there's, I mean, you can definitely see that there are still some people sitting in the, like, behind him. But if you overall look at my map, and I know I have players off, or if you look at my left, though, you'll see that there's a bunch of my party members. Normally, you'll have your party 1 sort of standing at your left, and ideally, you'd have your party 2 standing at your right. And as a result, there really won't be anyone behind them, or there shouldn't be anyone behind them. You can see that there's like maybe 2 or 3 people behind him, but, well, that's their fault. So normally you would rotate the backslashes. You would, for example, E at this point in order to face the backslashes away from your team. But in this case, you're actually just going to stand still. So while the lasers are happening, I just stand still. I let my, well, actually one of my party members just died. But again, his fault for standing in the wrong place. Yeah, normally when it comes to this, you just don't bother moving anymore. It's just better and safer for your team if you don't. Then again, he'll do his 5-hit rotation. This is usually when the lasers start to move. Again, for the rest of your party, they need to be careful. For you, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to be avoiding, you don't take laser damage. You can also check that you have the buff by looking at the top of your head. If you notice, at the top of my head, I have that symbol on it. That's just another indicator for the buff. Aside from that, rotation is the same. Here I tried to one block a red attack. That was dumb. But yeah, the rotation stays the same, and nothing really happens until you sort of make your first full rotation. Again, I'm not going to E because there's no point. Your team is ideally moving with you. And here we have made a 180-degree rotation. We started at 9 o'clock. We're now at 3 o'clock. This will be the beginning of sort of his, sort of a mech phase, if you will. An ad will spawn. So you can see that he has spawned 1 help. You don't have to worry about driving this time. Here's Sword Stance. I'm going to SS again. Let Stealth proc for the next 3 hits. And we're just going to continue until the lasers disappear. Okay. Once the lasers disappear and he finishes his attack, he's going to do this. He's going to downfall or do that same second attack to a few people. Fairly wide angle. So do be careful, and you may need to iframe. So here you can see that I eat away from it, and you can see that he's now shooting it at like the 9 o'clock person. These are usually aimed at the furthest person, so I'm just going to iframe that again, and then he'll continue back with his rotation. Now, here, again, I'm still not going to E behind the boss, and that's because if you notice, I still have party members that are at the, if you look at the top right of my mini map, you can see that I have party members at the top right, which is likely where the ad spawned. But for the most part, your parties are forming at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So you generally don't have to face the attack again. So you can just stand still for the most part. This will, assuming your party has done the mech face correctly, this will make the laser spawn in a hexagon-ish pattern. Keep in mind that at this point, my challenge buff has disappeared, so don't walk into lasers anymore because they will hurt. But this is also a good phase for your team to burst. You can see there I missed the red attack because I used my 3 beforehand. Usually, word of warning, because you've seen me miss that red attack a few times, I usually prefer to tab. It doesn't like move you back like it would with an F roll. I just generally find that safer. So I generally prefer to use tab over F roll on this boss if I do mess up. Here I'm going to hung and block the cross, and we're just going to keep DPSing and doing everything as normal. And what we're trying to do now during this phase is really push the boss to 10% and sort of begin the next mech phase. So you can see here the boss is at 12%. We're going to block the 5 hit, and we're just going to DPS until 10%. Okay, 10% signifies the start of the third phase. Generally, if you make it to this point, you are home free insofar as your party is not completely mutilated. You'll generally get the clear at this point. This point, the boss's rotation does change, and he does get quite a few attacks, but you're generally okay. So you'll see here that he has done his double slash, and here's a new attack that he is doing. It is a flash step, and we are going to iframe this attack. So you can see that I SS to iframe. You cannot block this attack, by the way, it's a red attack. Here I think I miss, but after the flash step he does a knockup, I believe. Yep, there we go. You can see that I actually missed that knockup, and then he does his special. So I get ready to hung and block the twirl, but it's on cooldown, so I had to use a self iframe. So you can see here that I use my shoulder charge, I believe the skill is called, and my cyclone. If this special attack ever happens and you don't have hung and block, or you know that it's about to happen and you don't have hung and block, very important that you call it out to your team. Let them know that they're going to need a self iframe, because otherwise they can get killed. And aside from that, he is then going to jump to the furthest person and initiate some knockdowns. These are going to be sort of similar to that special attack he did at the 35% phase. Here, you cannot control it. They're just going to be at the person that he's targeting. So they'll usually be aimed in front of him, so just sort of stand at his back. You can see he does the first one, then he's going to do the second one. You're going to just move if you need to. In this case I did, so I just E behind him. And then he's going to sort of E behind me. The last one will be at the tank, so again, just move. There I hung and blocked. I think I did that instinctively by accident, but because our damage is fairly high, it doesn't really matter, and we're at 4%, so we likely weren't going to get to another cross. Here is Swords Dance. Again, you should SS, but as long as you're at full HP, if you take the first shockwave, you won't die. But you can see here that it did like 23% of my health, so it is a good habit to iframe that attack. And he's going to double swipe. I got frozen there for whatever reason. Here is the same backslash. I should have probably E'd there. I think the freeze kind of, I was like, what the fuck? But yeah, normally you would actually E at this point. And then, yeah, the rest is just whittling him down. So it's not too bad of a fight. I believe the biggest hurdle is just getting through a bunch of memorization. The boss has a fairly, like I said, much longer set of attacks, and you just sort of have to get a rhythm down in terms of, you know, which iframes are you going to use on which attack, and getting the coordination down. But as long as you can make it to the 10% phase, you're generally home free. Just really paying attention to the map helps out a lot, and remembering that 35%, that one-off attack where he tries to knock you back, making sure you iframe that is super important, and staying melee range. Because once you get a healing debuff, before 100% healing debuff pretty much meant that you would instantly die at some point. But even now at 50%, while survivable, it's still not ideal. Chances are you're going to take a lot of chip damage, and you probably won't be able to heal it that much. Or you probably won't be able to out-heal that. So if you do take one, you're going to be forced to play a lot more defensively. But as long as you can avoid that, it really just isn't that bad. The fight's really just getting out to 10%, after which words you're solid. And that pretty much concludes the entire fight.